What if the most powerful kind of submission didn't involve ropes, pain, or punishment, but instead quiet devotion? Today, we're going to have a deep dive into the world of service submission, exploring the psychology, practices, and emotional intimacy behind acts of service and dom-sub dynamics. You're going to discover how small tasks can become sacred rituals and why this underrated role holds transformative potential for both dominants and submissives. I'm Brandon the Dom. Let's dive in. Service submission is the seemingly unsexy, quiet side of submission, which is often overlooked for the flashier types of submissives. From the outside, it might look like being domesticated and full of chores, but on the inside, it's a demonstration of fierce devotion. There's an intense satisfaction of being given a task, completing it wholeheartedly, doing everything you can to bring your dominant pleasure, and feeling the reward in your bones as you succeed. If that calls to you, then you might be a service sub or enjoy being served as a dom by a service sub. What is a service sub? A service submissive is somebody that finds pleasure in performing acts of service for their dominant. They derive joy from offering practical assistance, anticipating needs, and engaging in acts of care and devotion. Now, the type of service they can provide varies quite widely, ranging from housework, administrative tasks, and sexual service to mechanical support. Essentially, anything you can expect from a service provider or could delegate to another person. Depending on the dynamic between the dom and sub, service can also include sexual elements, but it doesn't have to. For many service subs, their submission is entirely non-sexual. Now, while this might not be as flashy as, say, a masochist sub, a bratty sub, or somebody that surrenders to a pleasure dom, those that identify as service-oriented may find it deeply fulfilling. In fact, service submission actually has a long-standing tradition in BDSM, particularly among those who engage in high protocol dynamics or do practices like boot blacking. A boot black is somebody that cares for their partner's leather by cleaning, polishing, and shining it. It's not a menial chore, but something that requires skill, practice, and intention. And it can be deeply submissive in an emotional way of pleasing a dominant. And while it appears mundane from the outside, boot blacking can be just as much as a scene as flogging could. The submissive is taking genuine pleasure in the act, while the dominant enjoys having their leather honored and maintained. As the submissive completes their task, they can sink deeply into their role, fully immersed in the service that they provide. Now let's talk a little bit about the psychology of service submission. On the surface, it might seem confusing if you're not a service-oriented person or someone whose love language is acts of service. So let's go ahead and take a deeper look under the hood at the motivations of both sides of the slash to understand why people engage in this type of play. First, why might somebody enjoy being a service sub? Whether or not you're naturally service-oriented, consider the feeling that you get when you complete a task. That little dopamine hit that you get when you check something off your list. As humans, it feels good to use our skills and abilities to accomplish something, especially if it's meaningful. Now imagine that same task is for someone else. You do this all the time, even at work. Think of how satisfying it feels to be recognized, told good job, and to see how your efforts contribute to the bigger picture. The task becomes more meaningful. You gain a sense of purpose, and you feel needed and helpful. Now imagine that that task is not just for someone else, but for somebody you deeply care about, somebody whose life you want to enrich, someone that you're grateful for their guidance, attention, and care, someone that you want to love and cherish. Now that task has become swollen with meaning. And when you complete it, the fulfillment is immense. When you see their eyes light up after receiving your service, your heart swells with joy. For a service submissive, the task itself is rarely the point, because some tasks may be downright miserable. What they're really looking for is that fulfillment and purpose. Now, how a service submissive goes about meeting those needs can vary. Some take a more transactional approach. They perform a task for their dominant in exchange for a reward, such as praise or a particular type of play. The fulfillment is similar to how you engage at work in order to get a paycheck. Some service submissives approach it from a positional standpoint. So some people are naturally drawn to giving service, contributing to a team, or following a leader's direction. These submissives enjoy being helpful to almost anybody. The fulfillment here is akin to when you volunteer. Then there's service submissives that approach it from a devotional standpoint. These are acts of service offered exclusively to a particular dom out of love, loyalty, respect, and admiration. The fulfillment is similar to doing something special for someone that you deeply care about. Service submission also offers opportunities for personal growth. As a service submissive, you often develop new skills, improve problem-solving abilities, and refine your communication. This is especially true for assignments like sex homework, which I have a video for, and I'll leave a link down below. Over time, these experiences can boost both self-efficacy and self-esteem. But no matter what form it takes, service submission is often an expression of love, shown through tangible, practical gestures. It's not loud, but it can be profound. Quiet, consistent acts that show affection, adoration, and care. And in return, the service submissive feels needed, appreciated, valued, and praised for a job well done. Now let's look at the flip side. Why might someone enjoy being served? Well, obviously you get free labor, right? Wrong. One of the dangers of service submission is being exploited. Some so-called DOMs hear that someone enjoys being a service sub and might think, perfect, just come over and do my chores. They assume that the sub enjoys the task for its own sake and takes advantage of the dynamic to get work done that they don't want to do or don't want to pay someone else to do. Here's the problem. That Dom isn't actually fulfilling the role of the Dom in that dynamic. They're not attending to the submissive's needs or offering any sort of meaningful exchange. Service submission is not about free labor. It's about mutual fulfillment, just like any other healthy DS dynamic. That means that the terms of engagement need to be negotiated, the service sub's needs need to be respected, and their limits clearly honored. Most importantly, the Dom must uphold their end of the bargain, delivering what is actually rewarding to that submissive. Now, for the dominant, it's not about getting a task done. That's just a practical byproduct of the situation. Personally, I make it clear that any task being completed in my presence is something that I'm allowing and entrusting my submissive to do. I'm an extremely capable man. There's no single chore, errand, or obligation I can't handle myself or pay a professional to take care of. So when I receive an act of service, it's not out of necessity, it's an act of devotion. It carries more emotional weight. When I'm served, I feel loved. I feel comforted, celebrated, and cherished. That act of service nourishes me, restores me, so I can show up even more fully in my dynamic. When you become the type of person that can meet all their own needs, the greatest gift becomes not having to. It's the kind of love that hits my nervous system in a way that says, you're not alone anymore. With that in mind, let's talk about how to be a Dom for a service sub. Because the dominant leads the dynamic and sets the structure, let's begin with how you can approach this with intention. The first thing you're going to be thinking about is obviously creating tasks. Now, there's several ways to approach creating service tasks, but what I don't recommend is creating meaningless tasks unless they're deliberately used as punishment. The entire point of service submission is that the task itself is infused with meaning. Instead, choose tasks that bring fulfillment to both of you, even if they appear mundane from the outside. Even the most simplest act can be a powerful gesture of devotion. Let's take, for example, a submissive fetching you water. On the surface, it's a very basic task. She brings you a glass of water. But with each repetition, the act can become layered with intention and ritual. So the second time, she might ask, "Sir, may I get you some water?" The third time, she brings the glass of water and adds, "May I get you anything else, sir?" The fourth time, she might kneel before presenting the glass of water. Bit by bit, the act transforms from routine assistance to a devotional ritual, and each iteration is going to deepen that power exchange. Now, a great place to start with creating tasks is some mutual brainstorming. Each person is going to explore the dynamic from their own position and identify tasks that would be meaningful. So as a Dom, start by asking yourself a few questions. First, ask yourself, what's annoying for me to do? One of the biggest points of failure in creating protocols or service structures is when a Dom designs tasks that seem sexy in theory, but in practice, they're impractical, inconsistent, and unsustainable. You might forget to enforce them or stop caring about them altogether. But when you assign tasks that actually relieve you of things that you find frustrating or tedious, you're going to be far more likely to notice when they go undone. And you're going to stay invested in holding your submissive accountable. Plus, by delegating those tasks, you free up your time and energy for higher priority decisions in the dynamic. The second thing you can ask yourself is what would improve the relationship? Some tasks are just going to simply make the DS dynamic run more smoothly. For example, you can have them keep the contract updated, source new scene ideas, or planning logistics for dates and play sessions. While the Dom should be making the final decisions, the submissive can often do the legwork of research, generating ideas, and handling implementation. It then becomes not just service, but a strategic partnership. Another thing you can ask yourself is what would make me feel cherished? Some tasks are to be entirely indulgent, and that's okay. What matters is that they nourish you. For example, I love receiving massages, not just because they feel good, but because I push myself hard in the gym. So having someone to tend to my sore muscles isn't just physical care, it makes me feel seen, supported, and cared for. Now, while I'm doing my own reflection, I'll also ask her to consider from her side. What strengths or skills do they have that might be useful to me? What kinds of service excite them? What types of service would they never want to provide? And what would feel terrible or draining if they had to serve me in that way? This is going to help me assess their talents, internal motivations, and their limits. Now, yes, the submissive can learn new skills in order to fulfill assigned tasks, but it's far more sustainable to start with what they're already great at and enthusiastic about. That said, not every task is going to be fun. Some are going to suck because that's the nature of many mundane tasks. Other tasks might be very challenging to learn. But if the task brings deep meaning to the Dom or fosters powerful growth in the submissive, then it may still be the right task to include. Now let's talk about addressing the service submissive's needs. Many people, not just submissives, carry the belief that having needs makes them a burden. For some, being of service becomes a way of feeling worthy of having those needs acknowledged, if they're acknowledged at all. And while this instinct seems noble, it often stems from a place of low self-worth. Service can become a shield against fear of taking up too much space. And in taking care of everyone else, the service sub might neglect themselves entirely. Now, let me be clear. Every person has needs, and you don't have to earn the right to have those needs fulfilled. Needs are not selfish, they are deeply human. As a Dom, part of your responsibility is to be proactive in tending to your submissive's well-being, especially because a service submissive rarely voices their needs directly. A brat might demand your attention, but a service submissive might quietly suffer. It's up to you to take notice. One helpful framework for understanding how needs are prioritized in a DS dynamic is a sort of modified hierarchy of needs. Not to imply importance, but rather to establish a flow of responsibility and structure. So first and foremost, each person, both Dom and sub, should try to meet their needs on their own. To create a healthy dynamic, both partners should do the best that they can to meet their own basic needs before expecting their partner to fulfill them. I believe DS should come from a place of wholeness, not scarcity. Then second in the hierarchy is the submissive's needs. Because the submissive is giving over control, it is your responsibility as the Dom to ensure their core needs, things like safety, care, emotional regulation, are protected. This is non-negotiable because the submissive is giving over power to you. They can't do it on their own. Then third comes the dominance needs. Once the submissive's essential needs are secure, their focus shifts to serving the dominance needs. Serving these is what's going to allow the Dom room to fully show up in the dynamic. Then fourth in the hierarchy of needs is the dominance wants. These aren't critical things, but they are priority. Filling a Dom's desires, once the needs are met, is part of the service role and keeps the dynamic alive and personal. And then lastly is the submissive's wants. If all other levels are being cared for, then the submissive's wants, the things that they'd enjoy but don't need, can be honored and included, rounding out a fulfilling and reciprocal exchange. Again, this does not imply that none of these are important, including the submissive's needs, which is last priority. It just gives a roadmap for what takes priority when things come up. Now let's talk a little bit about training a service submissive. Bringing a service submissive up to speed on doing tasks is much like training anybody else in a role. How much instruction you provide depends on the task's complexity, how precisely you want it done, and the submissive's existing skill level with that task. For high skill or high precision tasks, a direct, hands-on training or shadowing of you doing the task may be necessary. For low stakes or familiar tasks, a simple outline or vague directive may suffice, allowing them to use their own judgment. And this leads to two common types of service. There's reactive service, where the submissive waits for instructions and responds accordingly. This is more of a micromanaged style, where the Dom is leading every step. The other type of this is proactive service, sometimes called anticipatory service, because the submissive is anticipating the Dom's needs, solves problems independently, and only consults the Dom for major decisions. This style is often more fluid. Whichever route you decide to go, I believe it's important that the Dom occasionally does the task themselves. This keeps the Dom grounded in the effort that's required to complete the task and prevents them from becoming detached or entitled. Empathy is not weakness in a Dom, it's a sign of mastery. Now let's talk about when mistakes happen and how to correct them, because mistakes are going to happen. And for a service sub, The emotional toll of that mistake can be immense. These are often high achieving, self critical people who take pride in their performance. So even a small mistake might trigger shame, guilt, or a sense of failure. That's why correction doesn't require punishment as much as atonement, a way for them to repair trust and reset their sense of purpose. Because the psychological weight of disappointing their Dom is often heavier than any punishment that you could issue. So here's how I handle correction. First, acknowledge the mistake calmly and directly. You don't have to blow up, no drama. 2, explore the cause together with curiosity, not being overly critical. 3, make a plan to avoid it happening again. And then 4, reassess whether the task is aligned with the sub skills or support needs. Now, if the issue is behavioral or it's happening more than one time, then a more structured consequence or punishment may be needed. But remember, those punishments are delivered with the goal of growth, not shame. If you need help coming up with punishments or understanding how punishments are delivered, I also created a video for that. I'll leave a link down below. And finally, let's talk about aftercare for the service submissive. Just because service submission doesn't look like a flogging scene doesn't mean that aftercare is optional. Because service submission is still a scene role, not just a labor agreement. Even if it looks mundane, what the service sub is giving you is intimate. It's their time, effort, and care given in devotion, and that deserves recognition. So the work that they're doing should never be completely depleting. And when a submissive offers themselves in this way, they may still need aftercare. That might be a word of praise, rewarding them with their favorite scene, giving them physical touch, giving them a moment of closeness, or even a simple, "You're such a good girl, you make my life better." These small gestures can help fill them up. And when done right, they return to your service not only willing, but eager, because they feel seen, safe, and deeply valued. Now let's talk about the flip side of this for the service submissive and some principles for being a service sub. Because service submission is more than just doing a collection of tasks. It's a mindset. It's the way that you show up with presence, intention, and surrender. And like any practice, it's shaped by principles that help guide your choices and attitude, especially when emotions get complicated. So here's a few principles to ground your service in devotion and integrity. The first principle is if the Dom doesn't want it, it's not service. It doesn't matter how skilled you are, how thoughtful your gestures are, or how much you enjoy doing something. If your Dom doesn't want it, it's not service. In fact, it can become a burden if your Dom doesn't want it. The role of the dominant is to set direction for the dynamic. And that includes deciding what is and isn't needed from you. What might happen sometimes is you give a gift of service, hoping that it's going to please your Dom, but they didn't ask for it. Now that Dom is in the awkward position of either having to accept something that they didn't really want or doesn't meet their needs, or to tell you no, risking your disappointment and guilt. Suddenly, what was meant to be an act of love becomes a moment of misalignment. And yes, it can feel heartbreaking. Your time and energy were given to them as an offering. But part of your surrender means trusting that when your Dom declines something, they're doing it from a place of discernment, not rejection. Now, this principle becomes very tricky when you're trying to anticipate your Dom's needs, because the risk of missing the mark is a lot higher. So what do? You ask them. You get clear. You study them. Not just their words, but their rhythms. What are their priorities? What are their preferences? That's what turns a mundane task into an act of devotion. The intimacy of knowing someone so well that your service becomes seamless. The second principle is to serve with a positive attitude. One of the most valuable traits of a service submissive is a resilient spirit, a willingness to be corrected without crumbling, because you will get things wrong. That's part of the process. You're going to burn dinner, you'll fold the sheets wrong, you're going to forget a small detail, and your Dom is going to point it out. Not harshly, but directly. Your reaction in that moment is everything. A lot of vanilla dynamics are going to interpret correction as criticism, but your submissive heart is going to know better. You're going to hear a redirect and translate it as, you've committed to serving them. Be grateful for the opportunity to improve that service. There's no room for self-pity here, because the work is not just in the task. It's in the attitude behind it. You're not just complying, you're choosing to offer yourself fully, including your humility, adaptability, and grace under pressure. And then the last principle I'll share is a good servant wants their Dom to be right. You're not always going to agree with the decision that your Dom makes. Sometimes you're going to think that you know better. And sometimes you do know better. But submission is not about perfection. It's about surrender. Your job isn't to optimize, it's to trust. Every time that you hand over control, it's not going to go exactly the way that you imagined. Because your fantasies are polished and perfect. They don't include real world logistics, awkward first attempts, or clashing preferences. The real dominance and submission lives in the messy, beautiful imperfection of two humans navigating something sacred together. And here's the deeper truth. Maybe it's a good thing that it's not going the way that you think it should. Because when you let go of the need for everything to go right, you also let go of the responsibility of having to manage it all. You become free. Free to serve, free to focus, free to release control without fear. And that freedom, paradoxically, is one of the greatest gifts that submission has to offer. All of this is the silent power of devotion. Service submission may not dazzle like a public collaring or sting like a whip, but its magic lies in the quiet, unwavering presence. It's not a performance, it's a practice, discipline. It's a way of loving that turns the ordinary into something sacred, whether that's expressed through perfectly folded laundry, a meticulous spreadsheet, or a warm cup of tea offered with intention. Whatever it is, the heart of service submission beats strong and steady through those. And for the service submissive, devotion is not weakness. It's surrender that's refined into a purpose. And for the dominant who recognizes the true value of that gift, receiving service becomes a spiritual act of being seen, supported, and cherished. So whether you're the one serving or being served, may you both find meaning, not just in the tasks, but in each other. And may your dynamic become a sanctuary of trust, gratitude, and growth. Now, if you want other ways to deepen your dynamic, I recommend checking out this video on building trust in a DS dynamic, learning how to be both trusting and trustworthy for both sides of the slash. And doing these activities are going to deepen that bond between you both. So check out that video, and thank you so much for your time and attention.